and welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just, and with me today is author extraordinaire, Mr. John Cameron.
Well, thank you for even saying author, much less extraordinaire. I appreciate it.
I only speak the truth.
Glad to be here.
I only speak the truth, John. I only speak the truth. Speaking of truth, John, the Middle East is, well, it's not quite on fire yet, but it's burning, or smoldering, shall we say. It hasn't turned to glass as of this time we record the show. But it's very unstable over there, John. Everybody's worried about, who has what kind of weapons, who's willing to use what. We've got Trump deciding or to not to decide whether we're going to intervene. Was the latest I've heard is Trump has decided to not decide yet on whether
for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But he could decide not to decide about whether it's 2 weeks. He could decide to decide whether or not it's 2 weeks. Oh wait, or he could. Anyway, you get my point.
Yeah. And here's the thing, John. In a sense, John, I'm disappointed in myself because I don't care. I've reached the point where, at this stage, a pox in all their houses. Let them do to each other what they shall wish.
Well, I disagree. I'll wait in. I'm with Tulsi Gabbard, and she's getting an awful lot of flack about the warmongers. The neocon warmongers are pushing MAGA toward war when they ran on a plank of we don't want to be in war no more. And on the other hand, this is where decisions about international stuff. First of all, there shouldn't be totalitarian medieval regimes running countries and then trying to get nuclear weapons so that they can kill everybody who's not the same religion as them. Because Jews are next on the list, and after that it's Christians. And they have said that as public policy. They've said that's the stated goal of our country. Woo woo. So what I think is really cool is that there's a guy named Douglas Murray who's a wonderful, he's like a neocon English guy, but boy, he talks pretty and he thinks smart. And he wrote a book that at 19. Anyway, he wrote a speech 15 years ago that said exactly the same thing was going to happen, exactly as it's happening now. And he said that what everybody's going to do is publicly condemn Israel for taking out the lunatic despots that are running Iran, and privately in their homes they're going to say thank God for Israel. Turns out that they're not saying it privately in their homes. People on the streets all over the Middle East are saying it publicly on camera. The people in Lebanon are saying the reason we have war in Lebanon is because of people in Iran. People in Syria are saying the reason we have the lunacy we're going on here is because of Iran. People in Saudi Arabia are saying the reason that we have the craziness going on all around here is because of Iran. They're saying it publicly. So are we right to jump into that? This is so tough. It'll make you crazy, and I think you're right in saying you just don't care. I care for one reason. Many of my neighbors say, what are we worried about Iran? They don't have a weapon that can reach the U.S. Yes, they do. It's called a diplomatic pouch or a container on one of the 22 million containers on container ships that come into this country every year. Lunatics will lunatic.
Yeah, we can't ignore the fact that Iran has been going around the Middle East essentially being they're behind all the terrorists and terrorism.
They invented murder bombers.
Yes, they're the ones who pay all those bills. They're the ones who send the ammunition to the Houthis and to all these other, and to Hamas.
Hezbollah and Hamas and all of them.
All of those. So they are the ones who are funding all this. So it's like, don't cry for me, Argentina type of thing. I'm not going to spill any tears over them. But this fundamental conflict has been going on for thousands of years, and if we think our intervention is going to fundamentally change that, I'm highly skeptical.
There's one other thing I want to say.
Yeah.
May I?
Yeah.
All right, I know it. So the problem is we think that all revolutions will turn out like ours, where the good guys won. I think we might be the only country in the world where there's a revolution and the good guys won. Were they perfect? No. Compared to everybody else? Yes. What is happening in the Middle East is we love the Arab Spring because they were thrown over those despotic leaders. And what is in their place now? A caliphate. So you got even crazier people running the government. So don't think that if they overthrow the mullahs, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini or whatever his name is this time, that all of a sudden democracy is going to break out because other religious fanatics of the same ilk are going to be willing to kill more people to assume power.
Well, I remember, democracy isn't some holy fired thing, right? It's not some holy thing. It's, technically speaking, North Korea is a democracy. Technically speaking, China is a democracy. Technically speaking, Russia is a democracy. There's only 4 or 5 countries in the world that declare themselves to not be democracies. So the fact is, democracy isn't some holy
and the way
fired
most
thing.
countries work democracy is 51% of the people put their boot on the neck of the 49%. So,
well, 51% of the people who are allowed to vote put their boot on the neck of the people who don't. And, you know, what is it Stalin said? You know, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes.
Did he say that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's who
He's a
counts.
pretty smart guy.
Well, he did manage to get in to stay in power, but
You know what Truman said about him?
what's that?
This is just funny. I got to say, it has
Sure,
nothing
why
to do-
not?
He said, "I'm not afraid of that little pipsqueak." That's it.
That's it.
You got to throw a little humor into this, because if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, folks.
Yeah, it's
Well, the next one does make me cry.
the next one. All right, so let's move on, John, because we've killed 10 minutes of this thing anyway. The Supreme Court the other day, they issued a ruling that, what was it, Tennessee?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tennessee can ban youth transition procedures.
Yeah.
They can ban puberty blockers, they can ban the surgeries, they can...
Notice it says youth, folks.
Yeah.
Same people you won't let buy liquor or get a driver's license because they're not mature enough.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things we don't let our youth people do because they're not mature enough.
Yeah.
And, you know, I am not a fan of the government getting involved into our medical choices in any shape, manner, or form. But this ship sailed a long time ago with mandatory vaccines, right? We've surrendered that. And I've warned people that you do not know. Once you allow mandatory vaccines, that's the barrier fell. And so now it's just a matter of people making good arguments as when the government can intervene in medical, in your medical procedures.
I would like to point out, you know some people who basically are alive because they transition.
And I know people have been harmed with it too, John. This is a very complex matter.
What I do know is the science says that almost all people, if they go through the process of puberty and come out the other side, and very few suicide, some do, but an awful lot of people are having second thoughts, and even the gay community in the world is realizing, if they're looking at the numbers, that a bunch of gay boys and girls, because of the fact that they went in and had a 30-minute conversation with a non-medical type at Planned Parenthood and came out the door with puberty blockers, are having their lives turned upside down. And the rest of the world, the so-called civilized countries of Europe that we look up to, especially if you're a liberal or a progressive, aren't allowing this stuff and haven't for a long time because they actually looked at the science. So
well, they were in it early, and they followed the science, and they said, "Oh, we messed up," and they went back to experimental because what they found out, and this is what happened here in the United States, is you took when the person had to go through that long process to get through to the end of the gender reaffirming care, they had to go through a lot of steps, and most of them peeled off somewhere on those steps. They found the treatment they needed. They found the purpose in their life.
Psychologist or psychiatrist.
They matured. Whoever, right? There were hundreds of different reasons, but most of them peeled off, and so only those who got all the way through, you know, they had a high chance of success because they made it this long, difficult road. They really wanted it. They really needed it. And so those were high proof of success. And then they took that, hey, look, people who go through this are success, so we're going to short circuit this to make it easier. And the problem is making it easier made it worse. You actually caused far more harm than you solved.
And then, you know, as libertarians, we find that a very hard argument to make, that you should let people do whatever they want. But there are some cases, this might be 1 out of 1,000 times, where...
Well, the problem is politics got involved.
Yeah.
If politics had never gotten involved, it never would have gone to this extreme, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation.
We wouldn't have the conversation. There wouldn't be. The cool thing is that there's going to be an awful lot of lawsuits out there, and lawyers are so rich now. I don't want them to get richer, but You know, especially that person that went to a Planned Parenthood office and had a conversation and 30 minutes later walked out with puberty blockers. That's just medical malpractice.
Yeah.
And heads are going to roll, and they should.
It's going to start. That's how we solve things in the United States, right? Ultimately, is by lawyers getting involved and costing a lot of people a lot of money.
Lawyers getting rich, and maybe they stop the problem. A lot of times lawyers get rich and they cause the problem, but in this case, they're going to get rich and maybe fix the problem.
Well, talking about fixing problems, Mr. Richard Fields has an opinion on immigration this week. So let's see what Richard's talking about this week.
Hi, this is Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. Sometimes our country's largest, most divisive issues are actually the easiest issues to solve. Both trade and immigration policy actually fall into that category. We'll talk about trade next week, but this week, given the unrest resulting after ICE arrests and deportation efforts in Los Angeles, let's explore how easy it would be to fix our immigration problem. Polling indicates that anywhere between 58% to 70% of Americans want to see our country have a clear, straightforward, easy to navigate legal immigration system, including making it easy for undocumented immigrants to have a pathway to legal citizenship. In an 88-page paper published in 2023, the Libertarian Cato Institute documented why a path to legal immigration in the U.S. is effectively impossible due to the labyrinthine process, thousands of regulations, arbitrary category caps creating wait times of as much as 150 years for people from India with advanced degrees, and tiny annual quotas for many categories of immigrants. So, a substantial majority of Americans support easier legal immigration. The demographic reality of a declining birth rate and increased lifespan make immigration an economic necessity if we're going to keep the promises of Social Security and Medicare to those too old to be still in the labor force. Payroll taxes need to come in to fund the benefits going out, and that payment balance is already out of whack. The only way immediately practical to solve this is with immigrant labor. But President Trump and his Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, are more interested in appealing to the baser instincts of their nativist base. Miller pressured ICE into fulfilling a quota of 3,000 deportations a day by going to Home Depot parking lots, car washes, and farm fields in California's Central Valley to arrest and deport anyone without a green card or proof of citizenship. Naturally, that spurred demonstrations against ICE, and predictably, criminals joined the demonstrations and looted and set cars on fire. That provided video for sensational Fox News journalism, AM talk show talking points, and social media video, further firing up the base. Then a funny thing happened. The employers of illegal farm workers, illegal construction workers, and illegal hotel and restaurant workers started complaining to Trump that their businesses were being negatively impacted. Trump, recognizing his financial base, turned on a dime and said those categories of illegals would no longer be targeted. What this clearly illustrates is the evil of too many laws. The Immigration and Nationality Act, with its thousands of rules and regulations, creates too many laws. It gives demagogues like Trump the power to pick and choose which laws to enforce and which criminals to arrest based on political factors. In the Soviet Union, Beria, Stalin's head of the secret police, said, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." We're there. I started my remarks by posing the questions. If Americans broadly want easier legal immigration, why aren't we getting it? The answer lies in cynical politicians playing to their base. Republicans play footage of riots in their attack ads. Democrats don't want to limit welfare benefits for immigrants because their main motivation to increase immigration is to increase the number of Democratic voters. Here's a simple libertarian solution: wide open immigration with one simple catch. If an immigrant, once here, commits a crime or applies for any form of government welfare, they're on the first plane back to where they came from. Presto changeo, the only reason anyone would immigrate to the U.S. would be to work. That's essentially what we had prior to 1880, a one-paragraph bill to replace the Immigration and Nationality Act. ICE, unnecessary, demographic problems solved, layabout American natives obligated to compete with ambitious immigrants for jobs. Win, win, win. Attention, my Congressman Lou Correa. If you want help drafting this legislation, give me a buzz. But I'm not holding my breath that the political game playing by Republicans and Democrats will quickly cotton to my suggestion. I'm Richard Fields, and that's this week's Report from the Fields. See you again next week.
Here, here, Richard.
All right. Thank you, Richard. You know, immigration is a very, very difficult issue. But you know,
No, it made it one. It's actually pretty simple, but
Yeah.
we made it difficult like everything else.
you know, back in the days of Ellis Island, which was a lot of us libertarians kind of, you know, we use, that's kind of the theoretical methodology we'd use, is what would happen is people would get to Ellis Island, they'd get processed in about 3 days, and you know, about the longest it would take is 3 days. They get sent and dropped off on the streets of New York City, but then they would go find their community, or the community would find them, right? If you're Catholic, you go to the Catholic League. If you're Irish, you'd go to the Irish communities. They would help you settle yourself in. Now, maybe that meant, you know, settling in New York. Maybe that meant, hey, go to this town in California, or go to this town in Iowa, or go to this, you know, and they have their communities that they would set up. And we don't do that anymore. We don't even pretend to do that anymore. Now instead of having communities take immigrants, we use the government to do it. And we're surprised that things have become, shall we say, distressed.
I want to tack on to, despite the fact that 58% of the populace wants a simplified way for people who are here working to achieve citizenship, it doesn't happen. 80%, 87% of Americans want people to show some form of ID when they vote. That's 87%. Yet, politicians make hay.
Yeah, well, yeah, because they want the issue. They don't care about solving the issue. They want the issue.
They want
right?
the issue. They want the issue. Government's job is not to solve the problem. If they did, they'd be out of business.
Yeah. All right, John, we're going to have to run through this last quarter of the show here, third of the show.
I'll warm up.
All right. So, appeals court, we had all those, as Richard mentioned, there was the immigration protest riots down in LA and whatnot. And one of the things Trump did was he brought in National Guard troops, and he also brought in some Marines to protect the federal buildings, essentially to stand around the federal buildings.
If we didn't have federal buildings, we wouldn't need to protect them.
Yeah, there you go. And so, you know, the local judge said, no, you can't do that. But the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, right, which is not exactly a far-right court,
Well, they pointed out that the people on this panel two were appointed by Republican presidents. They never point out when they're appointed by Democratic presidents for some reason.
Yeah.
The press, yeah.
Yeah, but the court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, is skeptical that the judge has the authority to make that ruling.
The judge is the brother of the most liberal judge that was ever on the Supreme Court. Little coinky-dink there. Yeah.
Well, we know what happens, right? You go judge shopping, and you file the motion.
We can't do that.
No.
The government can. We get whatever judge they pick randomly to see the case. Randomly to see the case. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this whole thing, I don't like seeing troops deployed into our streets, but also I don't like seeing our streets dissolved into chaos where they're burning Waymo cars for no reason.
And then saying, well, at least it wasn't a private person's car. One of the socialist newscasters.
But they were burning private people's cars as well, and they were destroying infrastructure so they could have pieces of rocks to throw at police. And we're no fans, but we're not enemies of police either around here. You don't throw rocks at people. It's just
And again, the people in LA told their police to stand down. So you tell your police not to stop a crime,
and you're going to get more crime.
You're going to get somebody wanting to stop it.
Yeah, and so one of the consequences of this, John, is the Democrats have been screaming democracy is in peril, partly because of all this. And then they went and had this big far left nationwide,
paid for by the teachers union, Amy Weingarten, who some people call the most dangerous person in the U.S., funded much of that with teachers union dues.
Yeah, they funded a No Kings protest, which is funny, right? Because I'm sitting here, and again, we talked about this earlier in the show, where I just don't care. I'm at the point where I don't care, because I don't care about their issues because they don't care about mine. You know what I care about, John? I care about that our buses here in the city of Sacramento now have license plate readers on them, cameras that read license plates. Now those cameras, if you know how they work, they catch other things other than license plates. They're surveillance cameras on your buses, right? We now have here in the city of Sacramento, we have trash police, people who go around inspecting people's trash cans to make you sorted properly. And currently they just put a flyer on your door and then have a conversation with you about sorting your things properly. But we know how this is going to go. In 5 years, it's going to start fines. And if you
despite the fact that they take all the trash, put it on a truck, and go put it in a landfill or burn it, they don't separate it, they don't do anything with it, but they make us go through the work of emptying out cans and putting it in something in our house that stinks and waiting to put it in our green waste and rinsing the can out and putting it in recycle and making sure there's no plastic attached to the paper we put in recycle. And on and on.
And on and on. And we know that recycling is a scam. It's always been a scam. People pointed that out 40 years ago when they tried to start recycling. They go, recycling only works if the recycling plant is like right close next to you. If you have to ship stuff off anywhere, the whole recycling thing kind of breaks down because you're not saving the transportation costs.
Goes to Africa and they throw it in the ocean.
Or they send it to China and they burn it. It's or throw it in the ocean.
Well, if you burn it hot enough, it's a solved problem. But unfortunately, third world and second world countries can't burn it hot enough. So they end up throwing it away.
Yeah. So what the Democrats have proved is that our democracy is actually perfectly fine. If you can sit there and have a nationwide protest with millions of people who go walk around the country and protesting, well, if you're not a democracy, if you had a real king, a real despot, you wouldn't be able to freely do that.
Yeah, try that stuff in Iran, folks. Ladies, go try this in Iran. Go try this in Gaza.
Try this in Egypt. You know that thing that they just had, that March to Gaza thing? There was this March to Gaza thing. You guys can go look this up. And they got to Egypt, and Egypt said, no, we're taking your passports and deporting you. The locals started throwing things at them because you got a bunch of white women Europeans who come in there marching through Egypt, trying to tell them that they need to be nicer to the people in Gaza.
They wouldn't have the wall that makes the wall that Trump wanted to put up between Mexico and the U.S. look like a baby sandcastle in between them and Gaza if they didn't want the Gazans to stay in Gaza. And they're the only country, I think, that's ever put up a wall to stop war refugees from getting away from war.
Yeah, well, there's a reason. What is it? The leader of Saudi Arabia said, there's a reason you don't listen to us. You sit there and you listen to these far left Europeans. Yeah. Says, when we tell you what these people are really like, and you don't listen to us. But it was kind of amusing watching these far left protesters sitting there in Egypt going, but we can do this in America. You're in Egypt. You're not in America anymore, sunshine.
And one last point. I know we got to move on, so I'll be quick. Believe I will be. They say that they're obviously a majority because of all those protests. There's 2 million of you protesting if you believe the inflated numbers that the left-leaning media says about all this stuff. 50% of the country voted for the MAGA man?
Yeah, his immigration policy is what people voted for. Yeah. He literally ran on it. This is not a surprise.
Yeah, this is actually shocking that he's actually doing. He's the only politician I've ever seen in the last 50 years who actually does what he says he's going to do.
And I mean, immigration rates are nothing new. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, we had this movie, Cheech Marin, Born in East LA. It's the story of a Mexican-American guy who gets caught up in an immigration raid, gets deported to Mexico and has to smuggle himself back into the United States because he didn't have his wallet on him that day. And this is just a routine story back in the 70s and 80s. This thing happened all the time. And so do I agree with it? No, but can we stop pretending that it's this
It's brand new.
it's this brand new thing?
What is crazy is somehow this this massive, unstoppable wave of immigrants can be stopped, because there's like a day the other day where no new people came into the U.S. through the southern border.
Yeah, well, because if you stop the magnet, if you turn off the social programs, they're going to stop coming, except for those who really want to actually get some work done. All right, we got 2 minutes, John, so we're going to move on. California is facing massive job losses. We've got factories closing. We've got 3 factories closing within the same day. A major alcohol distributor has decided, we're not doing business in California anymore. We're just going to go stay back to Texas.
We could do business in Texas, but we can't do business here. Magical.
Yeah.
And Blue Diamond moving out of Sacramento because they can't afford to be there, and they can't actually afford to be in parts of the Central Valley that are even cheaper. That's 600 jobs, folks. Just.
And what is it? LA just passed a $30 an hour minimum wage for people in the hospitality industry, in
You're
tourism,
kidding me.
in the tourism industry.
Say what?
Yes, in LA, because they want to get it to $30 an hour by the time the Olympics hit.
That means there'll be nobody changing the sheets in all the beds for the Olympics. That's going to be a national embarrassment.
You've already had a string of the mom and pop hotels close because they simply can't afford it.
Yeah.
There's no way they can afford it. The numbers simply do not pan out.
Yeah.
It's not possible. And you're talking about a time when tourism is dropping.
Because you got riots in the street.
Because you got riots in the street. California's insanely expensive, versus, and foreign tourism is because of people are afraid of Trump's immigration policies. Some people aren't coming because they're afraid.
And they believe the when they see the pictures of the riots.
Yeah.
Because they're pictures of riots.
So, and we pointed this out. The $20 fast food minimum wage costs thousands of fast food jobs. AB5 didn't just cost gig workers jobs, right? They costed freelancers, your artists, your actors, all these people.
Truck drivers.
On
and on.
Lost their careers, lost their livelihoods, had to completely change their way of life.
Can we do 15 seconds on silence?
You got 15 seconds, John.
All right, so gun owners deserve the freedom to enjoy the sound of silence, and liberals are going to go, oh, no silencers. We'll have assassins in the streets. With a silencer, a pistol is as loud as a chainsaw. Without a silencer, it's as loud as a jet engine. Don't worry, folks. We only want to shoot our guns and not go deaf like I did, because I shot a machine gun for a living.
And most of the silencers are actually muzzle protectors. There's the flash.
The flash suppressors.
It's not really to keep the gun silent. Thanks, John, for being here. Thanks, the crew, for working aside. Have a good night. Please remember to love everybody.